All right, we are live. Hello and welcome to the Tiny But Mighty podcast. I'm your host, E. We are here for episode 13 of the Tiny But Mighty podcast. Hope there's no triskaidekaphobics in the audience. This is going to be a great one. Don't be afraid of this number at all. I am also the owner and founder of Main Street E-Market, which is the host of this podcast. And I am so excited for you to meet our guest. This week, we are talking to Meagon Nolasco from Color City Pride in Troy, New York. So all while in the process of working on a master's in social work, along with a team of very highly motivated people from the LGBTQIA2 plus community, they created Color City Pride in Troy, and they are focused and on a mission to be able to tackle some of the biggest challenges facing that community when it comes to substance abuse through empowering people in the community to provide peer resources. I'm excited to find out how we can help as allies to them and small businesses in the area locally to be able to contribute over time. And they are also going to be hosting a first annual Pride Parade in Troy this year on Sunday, July 14th from 12 to 5 p.m. I'll be there. All the cool kids will be there. So you don't want to miss out on this thing. You're going to need to set that on your calendar. Go ahead and write that down right now. Pause this and you can come back if you're not watching it live. Perfect. And if you are live, I want to make sure that you can get your questions into the comments and make sure that anything that you're looking to get answered along the way gets answered as well. So everybody, please welcome to the stage, Meagon.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. I'm so excited about this.
Thank you so much for coming. My first nonprofit small business to interview. I'm very excited.
We operate very similarly, as you'll see throughout this episode.
Yes. Well, and I think the most exciting thing for me is the idea to empower people that have the idea that they want to start a small business to be able to go in the nonprofit direction, but also not give them any illusions because there's some unique challenges that it presents, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Yes. It's a lot of behind the curtain work. It's like the Wizard of Oz, you know?
Perfect. I love it. All right. So let's peel back the curtain and meet the wizard because I think it's a real person. Definitely less magic going on, a lot more elbow grease getting in there and pulling up your sleeves. So tell us a little bit about yourself before starting Color City Pride. What's your story?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I am finishing up a degree right now in social work. I've worked for the past 5 years in the mental health, behavioral health field, predominantly with LGBTQ plus folks and mainly with folks who use substances, which is a field that we see a lot of gaps in services for when it comes to queer folks. Especially the most marginalized of us in the queer community, which are transgender, gender nonconforming, non-binary folks. So before starting Color City Pride, I worked for the Pride Center of the Capital Region in Albany for the last couple of years, until recently in January when I took on a new position working at the Senate. I'm a rare social worker that is not on the clinical track. I am on the policy track, but what really geared up my want to start this organization was I was finishing up my MSW internship last year, and in January, we really found some huge gaps coming from the community about where they could go to access inpatient treatment services, especially from folks who were trans, gender nonconforming, non-binary. And while we were working through this as an organization, in June of last year, a client that I had been working with for so many months passed away from an overdose. And they were a client that I would label as having a lot of privilege, right? They had a support system, great family support system, social support system. They had the ability financially to go to different treatment centers and services that were not just within their insurance bracket. And they also identified as non-binary. And every single time they went into treatment, were discriminated against, were placed in either a male or female binary setting, which if you're non-binary, that's the literal antithesis of your identity. And they stopped going into treatment and they lost their life because of it. So I thought to myself, if we are seeing this gap and no one's doing it, then we'll just do it. And that is kind of where Color City Pride came from.
I love that. And I think so many great things in our society were created by people who said, gosh, that seems like something we should have. Okay, let's make it. So that's really where we're at. I'm sorry for the loss of that patient and that friend, that human being. And it's interesting because you don't realize, not being part of that community, all of the different ways that it's going to impact you. And this is just a new one for me to be enlightened to and now understand the complexities of. And certainly overdose, just rampant across the country. I actually just lost my cousin. I just found out about it yesterday. Overdosed on heroin, and I think trauma being a huge link to risks for addiction. Certainly, all of the trauma going around the country for any member of the queer community is going to be a huge risk. So I wonder, and I was going to save this for later, but I wonder, how do we act as protective factors, as allies who are outside of the community? What could we do that would be a protective factor to help to stop this from continuing?
Yeah, I mean, there are you touched on kind of a lot of the relapse triggers that we're seeing in our community, which are on a base level. There's the traditional relapse triggers, right? The loss of a job, lack of steady employment, lack of housing, lack of a support system, right? But when you take that a little level further, for folks who are in the queer community, we're also looking at discrimination when we're inside of services, stigmatization once we are inside of treatment. And those can be difficult barriers to combat. But I think the best way that I would call in allies right now at this moment in time, both in history and in our country, is just to, one, educate yourself, on what it looks like to support and kind of live the trans experience, right? That's something that you can't research per se without living it, but just looking up what individuals are going through, looking up your local legislation, looking up what services you have in your area or what services you don't. And I would say the best way that I have been trying to call in allies to the community as a whole is, when you hear someone say something about us that you know is incorrect, please be bold. If it is safe for you, be bold enough to challenge that. Right? Even if you maybe don't have the knowledge base yourself. I work in the queer community. That is literally my work. And there are still things that I don't know and things that I am taught on a regular basis. So we're not expecting everyone to be kind of the Webster Dictionary. But if you hear someone use a derogatory term about us, if you hear someone debating our rights as if it's legislation and policy that should be implemented, things like that, that or you feel are not beneficial to us, speak up. Because we are called a minority group for a reason. We don't make up the majority of the population, but we do make up an overwhelming majority of the population that is facing discrimination and stigmatization. So those are kind of my two ways to call folks in, is just, if you, that old trope of, if you hear something or see something, say something, and also just to do a little bit of education and research. It really goes a long way.
That's incredible. I really appreciate that. And I think that the anti-bystander effect is really the thing that we're looking for across so many different places. Just allowing hateful rhetoric to be spewed and shared is not productive. It is a waste of time and energy and effort. And even just ignoring it is not enough. And what I've found effective in the moments where I have seen any kind of ism, because there's plenty to be had. And I've been harmed by it. I'm not going to lie to you. I have been in positions where I've been subordinate to the person who was doing the thing. And I lost that break in my head. There are no breaks. I just go for it. And I've found it to be effective to ask a question, because it doesn't feel as attacking. And they're going to feel attacked no matter what, because you're not just agreeing. You're not just going along. So what do you mean by that? Wait a second. Can you help me to understand that? Why do you have an opinion about that? How does that affect you? How is that relevant to this situation? Because sometimes it is just the most not related thing that gets pulled into the conversation and feels like it's out of left field. And so I feel like even that can help them to know you're not safe to share that here. And that's important.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you brought up asking a question, because I think many times folks outside of the community, even sometimes folks in the community, right, like lumping us all together, we are so fearful of asking questions because we think it's going to offend someone. We think it's something we should already know, so we don't want to look like we don't have the knowledge. But I will say there has never been a time where I have been approached with a question in relation to my community where I'm not, one, elated that somebody was bold enough to say, I don't know enough about that. Can you fill me in? Or I also love when folks come to me and say, I don't have an opinion. Can you give me the education on what this looks like? Because I think that's fair too. If you're not in the community and you're not submersed in what is happening all the time, I think it's fair to not have an opinion. And I would almost appreciate that more than an uneducated opinion
Yeah.
many times.
Yeah, oh, I love that. And I've seen a lot of that recently in activist spaces as they start to get healthier, where it's just an amplification of the voices and the experiences. And that's my hope through this podcast is to amplify experiences and voices and stories because they're meaningful and they're one of a kind and they're so important. And not everybody can write their memoir and it's all about their life, but everybody has such an incredible story that led them to where they are today. And holding the space to be able to share those things is really important, and making sure that we're not allowing those bigotry moments to overpower those stories and the discomfort that sometimes the story sounds very different than yours, that it can be uncomfortable. And I think the beauty of being able to sit inside of your feelings and connect with the emotion of why does that make me feel uncomfortable, and kind of asking yourself more questions. I'm kind of a philosopher by nature where I just want to understand why. I think that can be very valuable. Most people don't stop long enough to be able to do that, though, in our society, because we're go, 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 which also leads to higher predispositions to those addictions. Because the second that we stop and we start to feel those feelings, they are overwhelming sometimes because they catch up.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think too, talking about kind of the stigmatization that we face, not only as a community, but those levels of stigma are enhanced as we have more identities that we hold, right? So if you're an LGBTQ plus person, you're already living in a sense of kind of minority and discrimination, right? But then you add on to that an LGBTQ plus person who is struggling with substances, or even further to kind of like streamline it, a non-binary individual who is struggling with substances, who is looking for inpatient treatment. Those services just don't even exist, right? Like
Right.
in an affirming manner, because everything we see is on the binary, male and female. So
Right. And heaven forbid you also don't have money or support to be able to get the money. You're
yeah,
also a person of color, all of the different layers that can go into it.
yeah,
Um, and obviously intersectionality being something that we talk about a great deal, although there's a lot of interesting debates and conversations going on about those things. I like the layer idea because I think it really helps to be able to explain, okay, see that, and then you're going to get it even more because of also this.
right, absolutely.
So what did you want to be when you grew up, when you were itty bitty?
This always surprises everyone. I love when people ask this question. So I wanted to be a nurse. That was like my lifelong goal. And then when I was very young, probably 17 or 18, I realized that I could not stomach the sight of blood, and shifted my thinking, and shifted into social work and mental health.
Got it. Okay, so that is one of the other reasons why you're on the policy side of that track. Got it. That makes
Yes,
sense.
it all tracks, as you follow my line of life.
Definitely makes sense. So when did you start Color City
So in last June, when I had this client that passed away, first it kind of really shifted the whole trajectory of my career, because I thought I would be a therapist. I was really interested in that. I was always interested in policy, but I've always been told I would be a great therapist, and I feel like I'm pretty good at it. So I am pretty good at it, but I do not like it. Because my mind works on a framework of macro. So it was difficult to counsel people on kind of day-to-day coping skills when their concerns were lying in systems that they were working within. So
Yeah.
when this client passed, and I was really taking a hard look at New York State legislation as it related to substance use, I realized that there was and are so many regulations and ordinances that have been put out by OASAS, which is the Office of Addiction Support Services, but nobody was really following them. And that sounds like, oh my gosh, red flag. But from a provider side, many of these things were being pushed out on a website, in an email, at a one-off press conference. So the information was very construed. So when we started looking at starting Color City Pride, it began with the dream vision of, and is still our end goal, to open up an inpatient substance use treatment center with transitional housing that is specifically for transgender, gender nonconforming, non-binary folks. That's going to take us a little while. So in the meantime, we decided we wanted to at least provide education and awareness, one, to the community in the form of things like Narcan, naloxone training, education that is specifically around how to provide support to a family member or a friend or a spouse or a child or a sibling who is LGBTQ plus and also struggling with substance use, because we do have a lot of risk factors that are related to our community that are not present in every community. I think the last numbers that I looked at, somewhere between 6% of the LGBTQ plus community was struggling with substances, where the population as a whole was at 3.6%. So that's almost double for us.
Wow.
And those numbers really just climb as you start to get into the more nuanced identities and orientations of folks. So we launched in December with a with a mindset that I go into many portions of my life with, and thankfully it's worked out, where we're just going to do the thing, and we're going to try to garner support and the funding and all of the things in the meantime. And it worked. we're about 6 months in, and it's working in the way that we had hoped. So
That is incredible. And I think having a little bit of delusional nature is important if you're going to be an entrepreneur, because it's kind of, if you build it, they will come.
yes, or you hope really hard. I've also been in the nonprofit sector for many years. You know, I've been in this field for 5 years. I've been in strictly the nonprofit sector for 3 of those 5. So that really, to again kind of pull the curtain back, because I don't want to give anyone the illusion in the crowd here that, you know, like, we'll just run out and start a nonprofit and that's how it goes. I wish it was that easy. But I think that experience of being in nonprofit sectors on high level, you know, in high level positions, was what helped me have the confidence to start this nonprofit. But even to know where to look, right? Because you have to, there's many hoops that you have to jump through to become official. So
Yes, yes. And the money that's required to be able to fill out that documentation, and it's not necessarily barriers on the millions or anything else like that, thankfully. I'm not suggesting that we put more barriers in the way, but there's still enough friction that I think you have to be dedicated, and you're looking at bylaws, and you really do need counsel in order to make sure that you're doing it the right way. I'm working with a team to establish a nonprofit right now, and my biggest thing is making sure that whatever we do indemnifies that board and make sure that they are safe, but that we're not putting in too much either, because you have policies and procedures on the other side of that as well. So document control is a specialty of mine. I absolutely love making sure that everything is where it's supposed to be, and the documents are all linked to each other and have all of their nice little stuff in them. As a scientist, I did a Wadsworth application for New York State approval for a couple of different pipelines down in New Jersey when I was working at a small lab. And I mean, when you're working in a 100-page document and you have all of the policies and procedures that are related to it, if you can't build a good document control system, you are simply not going to make anything coherent that's going to make any sense by the time the reader is done. So that it's funny, because you find these analogous experiences that you can then apply to these other situations of like, oh, we're going to get ahead of this. We're going to have a system before we even start.
yes, absolutely.
So, all right. And then you're always audit ready too, because I'm sure there's audits that could happen in terms of nonprofits.
Yes, there are.
So we know really what led you to being in this situation, and it's a little different than where your vision is. Would you consider this like the minimum viable product effectively of what you're looking for? Have you achieved that yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think we did a really good job in the beginning. And by we, I mean me and the individual who is operating as our legal counsel, who also happens to be my fiance, which is another reason that I had quite a privilege in being able to start this. My partner is a nonprofit healthcare attorney, so that is exactly what we needed. But we really set up our long-term goal, our 6-month goal, 1-year goal, and our short-term goals. And we have met our short-term goals. We have provided and are providing Narcan trainings in the community. Everyone has been booked solid so far, so fingers crossed that continues. We have secured the amount of funding that we need through our fundraisers, through our sponsorships, through our vendors, the base level amount that we needed to cover the costs for Pride. So we kind of broke down, those costs by, this is what we would like to raise because we are a nonprofit, so we're continuing after this Pride event. This is what we need to raise, and this is what our at cost would be. And we have exceeded that at cost by a couple of $1,000s, which is amazing because we've only been fundraising since January.
Love it.
So that, I would say, yeah, we have definitely met our markers for our short-term goals, which I think is probably similar to the minimal viable product in this situation. And we're edging closer to our longer-term goals, but it does become an interesting kind of juggling routine when we are best known for this festival, right? And that's what everyone is excited for, which is great. That's what we wanted, because that festival is a large fundraiser for us to continue our work in a programmatic sense past Pride, until Pride season comes again, and then we'll only be doing Pride. But I think what I have had to learn and adjust to is learning how to run many things all at once. Because, we do have a small but mighty kind of planning committee of about 10 folks. But a lot of the back end stuff is me making connections with partners in the community, me making connections with sponsors in the community, and me also making connections with providers in the community, because that is our long-term focus, is to provide that education and awareness. So it becomes kind of a juggling act. And I will say that some weeks I juggle better than others. Some weeks I, just have to take a step back and things get a little delayed. But we seem to have been managing pretty well between trying to function as a group hosting this Pride Festival, and then the other side of us who are functioning as a newly formed nonprofit and crafting what our programs are going to look like once we get to that point.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And there's so much that goes into crafting those programs. And I almost envisioned, as you were talking about that, a conference where you could have all of these health providers come to you. Because yes, you definitely can do the grassroots of getting there and doing the presentations there and lunch and learns and those kinds of things. But that ends up taking longer, and you doing both probably is where your model is headed. But yeah, the conference idea and seeing this beautiful sharing and the stories to where they can understand what not to do through the stories, because sometimes that's the most powerful example that we have. Not necessarily, we're not going to tell you what to do, but this is probably not it. You figure out what not it looks like.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
Because folks really do rebel against the idea of being told exactly what to do. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges I've come up against when I've been talking to people who have had struggles, especially with non-binary pronouns. Well, you're telling me what to do. You're telling me what to call. You're telling me, whatever. I know that this thing is this. If you told me to call it this other thing, I wouldn't do that. Really? But you wouldn't? Like, are you sure we don't have nicknames for stuff? We do that all the time, So, and like my name, it's E here because it is constantly misspelled. And that is a compassionate decision that is compassionate for me, but it's also compassionate for the people who are going to permanently be messed up by autocorrect trying to just choose one depending on the day. And also because a friend had decided that they were going to call me that, and I loved it. And I was like, oh, hey, maybe somebody could actually spell that right. But there's a lot of people that push back against that. And I think it's that same, well, I mean, that's not a name, that's a letter. Like you can't have a name that's just a letter. Really? Like, how many of your friends you call Bubba or whatever other thing that's not their birth name either, man. Like, so I feel like just having those simple conversations of like, are you sure? And kind of thinking of that example can be so helpful in those moments. But I feel like having a conference full of people that are challenging all of those assumptions at the same time would be such a powerful energy to exist inside of.
Yes, it's been on our radar because we've had the same thought process. Full disclosure, I have told my planning committee that I love that idea, but don't bring it to me until August because I can't even wrap my head around any other large scale event until we
Yep.
get through Pride. But I think, kind of bringing up this idea too of bringing providers to us versus like us going, a kind of a roadblock that we have been running into, which I feel like we've navigated a kind of a way around it a little bit that has been more appealing to providers. But when reaching out to just kind of ask about what LGBTQ plus services they offer, a lot of them will state, well, we have these services, X, Y, and Z. They're always very standardized, kind of think any base level queer training you get on an annual.
Oh,
And
no.
that's kind of what folks are getting. And then we get a response that usually says, oh, am I still there? Okay.
You're
And then you'll
lagging
get a
just a little
response.
bit.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm hoping that remedies.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think you're
We're
good.
good.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not a robot. That's always my moving in real time. We have also gotten quite a few responses, and we operate in Rensselaer County, so it's not a huge county, but it is a large county. It's just a lot of rural county.
Yeah.
So we get responses that, we either have these things in place or we have these things, set up, but we don't have any LGBTQ plus folks who come to us. And that is always such like my stomach just like drops when I hear that, because the chances are that you do, not even chances, just statistically speaking, you do have queer folks that are in your programs or services, and they either, one, don't feel safe enough or comfortable enough or trust enough to share that with you.
Yep.
Or two, they have shared that with you and you have forgotten, or you feel that they do not warrant any kind of special treatment, right? Which we're never asking for special treatment. We're only asking for individualized, affirming treatment. And those words get thrown and tossed around, and we get a lot of, synonyms for those words, but that's really the base level. It's just, when you walk into any treatment provider, not just a substance use treatment provider, but a doctor, dentist, any kind of like health provider, you go in with the assumption that you will be treated in a manner that is respectful and safe and affirming. And when you're queer, especially if you're queer and you are somewhere on the gender diverse, spectrum, you also walk in with that hope. But I will guarantee that many of us, and me included as a gender nonconforming person, I'm always walking in on high alert to any provider. I'm ready to correct the pronouns that are used when they talk to me. I'm ready to accost them for their intake form that just has spaces for male, female, or other, or will just have like gay, straight, or other. It's just like those little things are really easy fixes, in my opinion. Things that don't require like an agency level approval. Just reprint your forms.
With an open-ended spot. You don't have to put every option in there. Just
no
let
box.
people self-identify.
No box.
Right.
So,
but at the same time, I will say the no box I like a little bit less, and I'm going to give you an argument for it because from a public health standpoint, you had just cited those statistics where we're looking at the delineation in rates of whatever it is between those populations. We don't get that powerful data to be able to support why we should care about this without those types of forms. But just have a little space to fill it in. And then if you have a drop down menu on your side of options, you can choose whatever is the closest to whatever they have filled in. Yes, is that going to require a little bit of thinking? Sure. But I'm sure that we can figure it out. And AI has brought us so many different places. I'm sure that we could do that as well. Although AI has its challenges in terms of equity. as well. And so I do want to just make an absolutely shameless plug right now. I am not being paid for this. There is an add-on to ChatGPT if you have ChatGPT Plus called Justice AI. Justice AI is specifically designed to be able to address equality concerns, and especially when it comes to policy writing for small businesses, even the public sector, like writing legislation and stuff like that, or college that wants to review its stuff and see where the biases are inside of it that might end up impacting different marginalized communities. It is a fantastic add-on that doesn't require an awkward conversation because it is AI, and it can help you to test your biases that are implicit in your policies inside of it. And I absolutely think that we need to see more of that coming along.
Yeah, absolutely. And a great point about the data too, that, it's so difficult to find data on our community because it's not kept in the same way that, the not generic, but the general data
Yeah.
is kept. We have been trying on our end as a smaller nonprofit to keep as much data as we can on folks who attend our fundraisers or community events. And, kind of on a nonprofit stream side, that kind of data is so ever useful when you're looking at grant applications. I mean, it's not only useful, it's necessary in many cases, but
Yeah.
I think sometimes we forget that you can't always just go online and Google and find the data, right? Especially if your community that you're serving, that typically is a very marginalized community, which also means that that moves you up in the grant line because those are the things that they're looking to fund. But without the data, it's difficult to prove, especially to state level grantees, that you are, providing a service to X, Y, and Z because it's needed for X, Y, and Z. Well, where's the X, Y, where's the data? So we've been trying to build that into a lot of we don't really have intake forms because we're not providing like formal services, but any of our community events like our naloxone training, or even just our community events where folks are coming to have a good time, trying to gather just like a base level data of pronouns, identity, orientation, things of that nature, because we're hopeful that in a year or two, we will have enough usable data to provide to the folks with the knowledge well above mine to process and actually make sense of the data so we can make formal asks of our state. Yes, folks like you.
Pick me. I will help crunch your numbers when you're ready. You let me know. And if you need help setting up studies and stuff like that, because I feel like that's kind of an area where you could use a lot of the principles from public health. Prior to moving up here, I was at Rutgers doing my MPH in biostatistics. I did not finish it. I want to be very upfront. I have no intention on going back and finishing it now because it's so long, but the pandemic and the relocation and all of the stuff that was going on. But yeah, oh my gosh, there's so much that could be set up as you're bringing people in to be able to collect the data that you want to be able to support your claims. And then, gosh, all of that data crunching would bring me so much joy to be able to deep dive into data. I don't get enough of an opportunity with it right now, other than side projects that I'm doing. So yeah, absolutely. Let me know.
It's all yours because my brain's doesn't work that way.
I'll make you pretty pictures too to go with it. It'll be great. Oh my gosh. And there's really cool systems that I haven't gotten into yet, but for qualitative survey data where you can pull out themes from qualitative, even just narratives where people are telling their stories. You can put them into this kind of software and it will pull out the overarching themes, most commonly used words, phrases, things like that. I don't know if you've read anything by Brene Brown. Okay. Yeah. So she does a lot of that. That's really her wheelhouse because a lot of her research is qualitative. So I feel like that would be potentially a useful tool to dive into. So all right. Okay. Exciting. I nerd out on data when it can be used because data and people both are important for the story, right? The data tells the story about the person and the person makes the data meaningful. They're required. And having that that narrative plus the numbers is how you bring these real issues to light, and potential real solutions through the correlations that you can find in the data sets. And that doesn't mean that the correlation is causation, but for the most part, when you get a really strong correlation, you should start investigating a little bit further. All right. So, what is the hardest part so far about this whole startup?
Oh, I'm thinking because depending on the week, it feels like some things are harder than others. Honestly, full disclosure, the hardest part for me, because I love this work. This was a dream of mine to do this. I never thought I could do this. I'm one of those like people that society says shouldn't be in the place they are. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. I'm a person in recovery for the last over a decade now. I started school late. I dropped out of high school. I have a GED, all the things that they tell you like, oh, that person will never make it. So this is a dream of mine to even have the ability to do this. But the hardest part as we move forward and incorporate is other organizations that we try to work with who, for whatever the reason might be, see us in an adversarial perspective. And I don't know exactly why, but I have a few thoughts. I think one, it can be difficult to be doing great work, which many of these organizations are doing great work. And to have another organization come in and say, we need you to do more, or we need you to do something different, which we of course never approach things that way, right? We approach them from a very, but what I say versus what is taken in is different. So that has been a little bit of a struggle. Also, personally, it has been difficult for me to try and remind myself how long these kinds of things take, right? How long these projects take to really take root, especially because we're a community org. Nonprofits belong to no one. I started this, I founded this, and I don't own this. In a year from now, my board could come in and say, get the hell out of here. And I would leave, I hope that's not the case, but I've got any inclinations that that's the case, but that's how it's supposed to be. Is it's supposed to be a community organization that belongs to the community, and I think we've lost that a lot in translation throughout the years of nonprofits. Right? We all know the really dark side of nonprofit world, where it can be very exploitative of its employees, where it can be very exclusionary of its portions of community. We in the queer community also have done that to the most marginalized folks within our community, so trying to wrestle all of those topics and remember that we're doing good work and we're doing as much outreach to organizations that are already in the community as we can. And I can't make anyone want to change or work with us, and that's okay. But I also am not going to stop doing the work that we are doing because the community is giving us the support and we belong to the community. I don't belong to any other nonprofit. I don't belong to any state agency. Our organization belongs to community, and we have had an overwhelming number of people support us in that, and an overwhelming number of organizations too. But it has taken some time to kind of get into the ear of the orgs and say, listen, there is no critique or criticism here. We're not trying to reinvent your wheel. We are just trying to add some spokes to the wheel so that it can run a little smoother. Use us. That's essentially kind of our pitch is, use us for the knowledge and education that we have, both in lived experience and in education, and allow us to make your organization and your programs as receptive to folks as possible, because you are the providers. Trying to open up a new treatment facility takes millions of dollars, a lot of state level, even maybe federal level grant funding. It takes years. So we know that we're not going to be in that position for a while, but I'm going to continue to work day in and day out to take the providers in the area who are already doing great work and just level it up a little bit. But that has been the most difficult, mostly because I think I underestimated how adversarial it would feel coming back at us. Because I'm a social worker with an ever endless hopeful heart, and I'm a little oblivious sometimes in that sense, but I like that. I like being naive in that sense. So when I came in and was like, we're here to do all the things, what can we do for you? And it was being met with, well, we're already doing that. Are you?
Really?
Are you doing that? Of course I don't respond that way in my email, but my thought process is, are you doing? And I think that now that we are becoming a little more established, we are offering events, people are seeing us in the community. I think that will also help. But that's my favorite part of this job is I love people. I love to talk to people. I love the outreach. I'm like one of those rare souls that loves public speaking and I love
Me
that.
too.
So
Yep.
that's been great for me. And I'm here for the long haul to keep working on those partnerships and hopeful that folks will continue to see us as a resource and not as like somebody coming in to steamroll. We don't even have the capacity to steamroll anyone. We're so new. We don't have the number of people to even steamroll you if we wanted to. So don't worry.
I have definitely found a very similar, there's a finite pie and you're trying to take a slice, and all I'm trying to do is uplift small business. And I mean,
Mhm.
I found adversarial relationships inside of people who literally just want people to shop more with local small business, which really didn't make sense to me. So I definitely understand what you're saying inside of that one. I think these are big movements, and every single person that gets on board is building momentum to the movement and is making sure that we make meaningful change in our own ways. And we're all going to have unique contributions to these kinds of things. And it's more like a chariot that we're pulling together, and we need more hands to create lighter work. And I am equally as hopelessly hopeful for humanity, which is the reason why I keep going. But the quote that comes to mind from what you explained is that, and I believe it's Einstein, and I'm probably paraphrasing and misquoting. And I do know that he was a misogynist and buried his wife's research and all of those things. And for anybody who doesn't know, please do me a favor and go look that up, because she was the brains behind it. And after he left her, he stopped publishing. But anyway,
Mm.
difficult things take time and impossible things take a little longer. And so that I hold in my heart, because when somebody looks at me and is like, well, it's impossible, you're not going to be able to do that, I'm like, okay, it'll take an extra couple of minutes. That's okay.
I love that. It's great. I'm going to use that one.
Um, and not to say that I'm a particularly patient person, because I'll just continue to try and work round the clock until I burn myself out, because clearly if I could just spin my hamster ball a little faster, everything will be fine.
Can relate. Can relate.
Definitely not at all. No. All right. So on the flip side, favorite part of this endeavor so far?
I will say there's a moment. I don't feel like there's any favorite things because there's so many aspects of this that I love, but a favorite moment was we had our first naloxone, community naloxone training a couple of weeks ago. We only had 10 spaces because we wanted to keep it small. We had 25 people sign up, which is great, a great problem to have. But what we have done that I feel like is something that is different than what we're seeing in the community is we incentivize our naloxone trainings. So for the first 5, hopefully as funding increases, we'll move that to 10. But for the first 5 folks who just show up, get the training, leave, $25 on a gift card. And in that training, almost everybody left before I gave them any of their gift cards. They, which sounds small, but like my point when we started in offering this and when I was like very adamant, I was like, I want to incentivize it because I don't care why anyone comes. I truly don't. If you're coming solely for this $25 gift card, but you sat here through this hour-long training and you leave with a Narcan kit, that is all I want. Because that's the point of naloxone, right? Is for many reasons, but we want just regular community members to at some point possibly be able to save a life. So when folks came into that training and we had 12 folks show up because I extended it to a couple more spaces, I think I gave away 2 of the gift cards and I had to hunt down the other folks to give them theirs because people were engaged. They went through the training. They asked questions. They talked to us at the end. They got up, they left. That was not at the forefront of their mind. And that was a really, really amazing moment because this was our first training. I didn't know how it was going to go over. You always have like a vision in your head of like, this is how I want it to be. But as we know, many times that's not how things happen. And it really was so much more engaging than I even thought. So that has been my favorite part, is every time that we have had an event or a training, I go in with really low expectations because we're new, and we just hit it out of the park. So that helps signal to me that I am at least listening to what the community is asking and providing some of the things that they would like.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. You provided the value. You didn't need the money isn't what was valuable out of that situation to anybody. And that's the reason why they walked away that quickly. That's beautiful. And I agree with you. I don't care what brings you to it. And it's interesting because you'll see that in activism spaces, unless this is the reason why you're here. Hey, who cares why they're here? They
Yeah.
have hands. They're going to make lighter work. Let's go. Let's make some change here, man.
Yeah.
And I can totally and I think it's funny because I think about statistics all the time with the Gaussian distribution normal curve, right? Where every single group is going to be normally distributed around a variety of topics. And so you go to these spaces and you think you're going to find your tribe, and everybody thinks their tribe is just going to think exactly the same as they do.
Yeah.
That's cloning. That's not community. It's very different.
Absolutely. That's a good point. It is cloning. You're right at that point.
All right. So your whole work is mission based. I usually ask about a side mission that people hope to be able to support, but I mean, that is kind of silly inside of this. But is there anything other tangentially that you kind of see organically starting to grow out of this that might get added?
Yes, actually. So our mission, is to support LGBTQ plus folks in Rensselaer County who are struggling with substances and who are looking for like an affirming space. What I have seen, our focus has mainly been on fundraising for Pride, with a few trainings and stuff kind of added in. What I have seen though is this growing movement now in our area, in Troy specifically, of queer-based events, right? Queer, not just like bar events, right? That's traditionally what we see offered in our community, always centered towards a bar, but queer gatherings. There's a queer book club in Troy with a large following that we just partnered with on an event. There's a huge like drag community that's building up and kind of taking over bars in Troy that you would normally think were queer-based bars. So just kind of this like quiet but not so quiet movement of LGBTQ plus folks taking over space in Troy, which Troy has been so queer for so long. I'm surprised this hasn't happened sooner, but I think sometimes it takes a few individuals kind of putting themselves out there, taking that risk, right? And then folks see that is doing well, and they're like, oh, okay, I want to do this thing, or I want to have this group. So like that was something I did not anticipate. I thought we would spend a long time even being established in this area as an org, but really establishing as an LGBTQ plus population of this area. And in the last 6 months, we've just like blown up. There's gatherings all over. So that was, and I don't know if that, I don't have us take responsibility for that, but I love that there has been this movement, a flowing movement, really since like last year when they hosted Troy Pride Night Out, of queer folks taking up space, right? Because we so often don't have those spaces. And you'll hear from all of the others, right? The folks that are on the other side of the support, or lack of support, I should say, that, why do they have to have a space? Not everyone gets a space.
Ugh.
And I think it's less about us having like one or two central spaces where we all go, and instead imagine a whole city where you're queer and you feel comfortable going into the bars, to the coffee shops, to the nonprofits, to get treatment services, to get mental health services. Like, that's a phenomenal thought, right?
Yeah.
That is a phenomenal thought.
If you could find a place, okay, I need a second here. I'm going to Brene Brown pausecast this for a second, because I was just making a video earlier today for one of my personal channels where I was talking about utopia. If you could have a heaven on earth, how you define it. I'm not a religious person, but however you would define, not waiting for that promise, but building it right now, what would it look like? And you just fully explained it to me. When the most marginalized among us are safe and welcome and can take up space or be in the background and choose to do anything and be okay, then you know you have the systems that you need for a beautiful society.
Mhm.
If only the powerful can feel comfortable, you gone done messed up. That's no.
We already did that. Let's try that again.
Yeah, like, let's stop trying the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Let's go in the direction of something new where the tiniest can feel mighty to be able to do the things that they want to do, and that the small businesses are the focus, and everyone has the ability to be safe. And nobody's asking folks that are on the opposite end that are judgmental of these things. Nobody's telling you you have to go to the drag event. Nobody's telling you you have to be there. And I love the idea of more things getting away from alcohol, because as somebody who grew up with problematic drinking in households, it is not something that I drink like twice a year. It's not necessarily that I'm in recovery from it, but also I found drinking to just be problematic for me from a mental health standpoint because of having watched it. And it didn't happen until I had my kids, and all of a sudden I was like, gosh, this is what, okay, understood. They were sacrificing safety here. Gosh, wow. So that, for me, when people are like in business, oh, happy hours and da 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 da, pass, not interested. I don't even want to go to the happy hour because I don't want to know you when you are cocktailed. I want to know sober you.
Mhm.
I want to know capable of connecting to your feelings you. I don't want numbed out you. Numbed out you isn't going to have a deep, meaningful conversation. You're going to talk about stuff that's silly. And yeah, I'm sure it'll be funny and we'll laugh a lot. And if we agree on a lot of things, it'll be great. But connecting in community requires a level of presence. And you sacrifice that when you're putting substances into the mix. And you also alienate anyone who has substance abuse issues, who is in recovery, who is trying every single day to stick to sobriety. And I love the movements that I've seen in Troy around mocktail hours and stuff. There's been so much that's come out from being up here. I love Troy. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Same.
Um, all right. So we're coming up to our time, and I don't want to run over on you. I want to make sure that I am respectful of your time. So let me just pick the right question here. Oh, gosh. Well, obviously, what advice would you give to somebody who wants to start their own nonprofit?
I love this question. I've been waiting for someone to ask me this question because I feel like the knowledge of starting an organization like this is almost gatekept. It's really hard to find.
Yeah.
My first and foremost suggestion is, if you are able, get a legal counsel. There are several free or low cost legal counsels in the area. You don't need to have like a retained lawyer, but just someone that you can bounce questions off of. That's my first suggestion. Second,
And
oh, go ahead.
SBA, SBDC, and SCORE, I believe, can all link you with some of those attorneys that do things pro bono as well. And as a new business, you can be eligible for that in New York State.
Yes, absolutely. Second, immediately find yourself a fiscal sponsor. And you're thinking, what the hell is that, Megan? Because that's what I thought when I had to be told what it was.
Sugar daddy.
So, you, yeah, exactly. You are unable to collect donations that is not taxable income if you are not an official 501c3, which means you have been granted IRS exemption from paying taxes. Just some forethought on that. That takes about 6 to 16 months to process.
Wow.
You typically don't want to wait that long to fundraise for your organization. What you can do, and what we did at Color City Pride, is you can have a fiscal sponsor. So we are using the YWCA in downtown Troy, which is a nonprofit. And that basically means that our money is funneled through them. So it goes under their tax exempt umbrella. And we are still able to operate financially as a nonprofit, which means that we are able to collect donations both online and via check and cash. It all funnels through the Y. They cut us our checks to pay our vendors, all of that. That's my second really, really important but not talked about subject. And third, don't exploit yourself while you're doing this. I was really intentional that I wanted this nonprofit to look different than the nonprofits I had worked for. And that started with the time that we ask of the folks that work with us, or in our case, volunteer with us. And in your case, if you're starting something new, unless you have a couple of $1 million, you probably don't have enough money to pay all staff. So you
Right.
want volunteers. But when you do get to a point where it is time to have staff and employees, don't exploit your employees. Don't try to bring them into working 60-hour work weeks because they're really passionate about the cause. No matter how passionate you are, you will burn out and you will be of no use to the community that you're so passionate about. And I say this from firsthand experience. The last few weeks, I have taken a little bit of a step back from Collar City Pride because I am really passionate about this project. And I spent 3.5 months burning myself out. And I realized, luckily, I have experienced burnout before as a social worker. So I recognized the signs early and I was able to kind of, take my workload down a little bit. And I will tell you, after 2 weeks of taking my workload down a little bit, nothing has exploded. Nothing has caught on fire. Some people are waiting maybe 5 to 7 days for an email response. That is okay. Remember in this that it is really easy to get really involved because your passion drives you, but you are no use to anyone, including yourself and your family, and like anyone you have at home outside of this org, if you're burnt out. Take the time, allow yourself to take the time. Do not let anyone get to you when they tell you that you are unable to take the time. Everything can wait. If you need a night out, everything can wait. If you need a couple of days off on the weekend, it will wait. Now, the flip side to that is communicate though with your team when that's happening. Don't just like drop off the face of the earth, but be honest, be vulnerable. Let your folks know who are on your volunteer team, hey, I've taken on a lot. I'm feeling a little exhausted. I'm going to take a day or two. If they question that, I would question their involvement in your org. And I would also keep an eye on them to burn themselves out. And make sure
Mhm.
the team isn't doing that as well.
Oh, that's amazing advice. Amazing. And I think the host 501c3 piece is something that you're right. Nobody talks about. When I found out about that, I was like, oh, okay. So you can kind of be like the kangaroo pouch inside
Yes,
of their little nonprofit
I love
while,
that.
while you're incubating and coming along. Because yeah, you can't wait that long if you are going to be able to pay people. You hit on so many points that the exploitation of workers inside of nonprofits and really all social spaces. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that, well, this is values driven. Okay, well, until we have universal basic income, we cannot be in a position where we are not paying a livable wage to people who are doing this for a living. And the fact you talk about being vulnerable and modeling those things for your team, that's really, really beautiful. And modeling it for other people. It's so important. And it's hard because you want to keep going, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. And we all
Yes.
think that, okay, I'm gonna change time. I'm gonna warp time space by moving as fast as I possibly can. Well, guess what? That's not the reality. You are going to run out of energy, and there's still going to be a few miles left to go, and you're going to have to still figure it out. So,
Yes. Absolutely.
oh man. Awesome. So we are now at the 2 o'clock marker. I don't want to put you in jeopardy of your next meetings and make sure that I'm respectful of that. I think we are going to have a second part to this conversation as things are coming along. And
Yes.
maybe we'll talk again after Pride so that we can get updates on how all of that went. Is there anything that I didn't ask you before you go that you'd like to be able to share, though?
No, this was so great. I thank you for inviting me and us as an org onto this podcast. I don't get to talk a lot about the back end stuff. And it was kind of validating to me and my team that we have really been doing a lot of work. And I hope that it was helpful. And I hope that any folks out there that are looking at going down this path as well, there's a lot more research to be done than what I shared, but just kind of help with some jumping off points. And to remind everyone that every single nonprofit has started like this. Any huge, large, massive $1 million corporate or tiny little community org has all started somewhere in someone's living room or bathroom while they shed tears or car while they blast music. that is where all of these nonprofits have come from. So don't let it deter you if it seems like a lot of work. It is very much a marathon and not a sprint. So thank you. This was great today.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And that is such great advice. And I hope this reaches even just one person that is thinking about it so that they can protect themselves. Thank you so much again. And hopefully we'll talk again soon. All right. Take care. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. This is a brilliant episode. This is relating to every single possible cause that you could be looking to support over the course of time. Allies got a bunch of information. Also, hey, listen, a thought for allies. You could also donate to these nonprofits that are doing this work. Great idea. Or volunteer your time. Figure out how to make lighter work for everybody. Find out where you can do that local to you, even if you're not local to the Capital District. I appreciate you taking all of the time to be able to be with us today. And if you are heading out for any reason over the course of the rest of the week and the weekend, I hope you shop small as always. Thank you so much for joining me on the Tiny But Mighty podcast. And we'll see you next week for another episode with another fantastic guest, Wednesday, 1 p.m. live on YouTube. Take care.